Welcome to all our listeners. Welcome to the first episode of 2022 Ubuntunomics podcast. With me this episode is Sbu Nyati. Hello Sbu, how are you doing?
Hi there, hi. Yeah, I'm well, thank you, man. This is the first episode. I'm quite excited about the year. Anyway, how are you doing, man?
I'm very well, thank you. I can't complain. And with us this week as well is Uzama Matungandaba. Hello, Zama.
Hi there, Sia. Hi, Spoo. How are you guys doing this week?
Yes, hi, Zama.
All good, all good. All right, so I'll get us started on the essay update this week or this month. Well, perhaps we should inform our listeners of some changes that we want to run on the show. As opposed to having the weekly episodes, we'll be running monthly episodes this year. And this is the first of those for February 2022. And for all our listeners on whatever platform you're listening to, please hit the like button and share amongst your family and friends. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And the first story in our essay update this week is the SA Free Data Plan. South Africa is planning to provide 10 gigabytes of free data per month to every South African household. And in a speech during the SONA debate, Minister of Communications and Digital Technology, Ms. Khumbudzo Popi Nchabeni, announced that the department is working on the radio frequency spectrum policy as well in order to embed high frequency spectrum and allow government to prescribe minimum data to homes, similar to the way that government provides free basic electricity and water. Zama, what are your thoughts on the story?
Well, Sia, I think what a great and positive development. As you know, I mean, obviously in recent times as well, we've had, inquiries into the price of data in, South Africa. So to see the government actually, make strides to actually provide households with free data is just, setting us up on the right path to create, better opportunities, particularly from the perspective of, education, job opportunities, and, just access to information, as everything is just generally online now. And I think that it's also going to lead to an increase in the standard of living. So I think this is really positive development, and I would encourage the government to go further with this plan.
Yeah, definitely agree. Look, I think I also like the fact that we're putting access to broadband internet in the same vein as basic human rights such as water and electricity. And for me, it's high time. And I think amongst all the social security plans that government is coming up with, this is definitely one that I can stand behind. Definitely in the current climate, and it's just an enabler that will definitely equalize the field for a lot of people. Sbu, what are your thoughts?
And it is now even more apparent that data and digital communication is, as the minister says, and you've said, Sia, a utility like water and electricity. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the stark social divide in South Africa. So use of data has now become a public good, and everyone can just access it and be able to use it. So, and what is more pleasing is that there's an insistence for telecoms companies who would be bidding for the spectrum auction to provide connectivity to 18,520 schools, to 5,731 clinics and hospitals in South Africa, and 8,241 offices of traditional leaders, meaning most rural areas, there will be a connectivity point. These service obligations will actually form part of the licensing conditions, and companies won't simply get off lightly by saying, no, we won't connect people, you'll just pay off the penalty. So I like all these developments. I'm really chuffed about them. But now estimates are that it will cost around 1.7 billion rand per month. That is calculated at a minimum of 99 rand per 10 gig bundle from Telkom. So it looks like these telecom companies will carry this cost, and it will be worked into their bids. So this is promising. I mean, I'm really chuffed about it, because as I said before, data and access to these digital platforms and all of that is a public good in the 21st century. So I'm quite happy.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. And on that note, let's move on to the next story in the SA update on South Africa launching the Hydrogen Society Roadmap. And the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, launched the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, which basically highlights the country's vision to develop hydrogen-related technologies in the country, which is estimated to provide an additional $4 to about $8 billion in additional GDP, as well as create an additional 20,000 new jobs if the vision of this hydrogen valley is fully realized. Zama, what are your thoughts on this one?
So this is quite an interesting development for me as well, and just wanting to, understand the government's direction in taking, this hydrogen roadmap. Is this part of trying to be a greener economy?
Yes, definitely. Look, I think one of the key obstacles that we face generally, I think globally, as we transition towards clean or green or renewable energies is the issue of baseload. The fact that even if we do get successful sunlight, for example, with solar during the day, you still need either batteries or an alternative option for energy to carry you through the night, or even when there's not enough sunshine, overcast, rainy, etc. So hydrogen, I think, is a crucial part of the plan, particularly for the transition on fuels from petroleum, diesel, and into perhaps renewable or clean fuels. The idea is that, given some of the facility that government launched in the Northern Cape last year, along with Sasol, is to use renewable energy such as solar to run a chemical process that essentially separates hydrogen and oxygen from water, and then to use the hydrogen to run generators that bridge the issue of base load when there either just isn't enough energy from renewable sources, or we need to use storage, etc., battery storage, etc. The hydrogen is a critical part in being able to then bridge that baseload gap, and hence this plan has the potential at least to transform the local energy, and particularly for fuel in the country. Spoo, what are your thoughts?
This has been a long process, starting way back in 2008, and industry has long been crying out for tangible movement in the hydrogen and fuel cell technology space. It was miners, most especially, who have bemoaned lost opportunity, because South Africa has a comparative advantage, with the country being home to 75% of the world reserves of the platinum group of metals. So what has impressed me with this announcement is the establishment of partnerships with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization called UNIDO. And then there is the German Development Bank, KfW, who initiated a 200 million euro program for the establishment of green energy projects in South Africa. These partnerships for the creation of the National Hydrogen Energy Center will institutionalize the implementation of the Hydrogen Society roadmap. So that will make the institutionalization will make the whole process much more effective and swift. And then there's on the other side, on the commercial front, there's a partnership between the IDC and Sasol. They want to achieve goals. They want to achieve both of their goals. Since Sasol is playing in the commercial front, they will be pursuing innovation, and these such partnerships help in mitigating risks and just the pursuit of innovation between companies and financiers. So the partnerships is what impressed me the most about this entire process. Yeah.
Very interesting indeed, Sbu. I actually didn't know that things were this advanced. And I must think, it's commendable, at least on the part of the banks that are already making these commitments to provide the financing, that, the developed countries are moving swiftly towards their commitments at the last COP26 conference in Glasgow. So I think this is definitely positive development, and anything that will create jobs for me and then help us transition to more renewable energy sources is definitely a positive towards sustainable development.
Yes, yeah, certainly.
On that note, let's move to the last story in the SA update on the WHO launching the additional mRNA hubs in Africa. So the presidencies of the European Council, France and South Africa announced the first recipients who were supposed to be spokes in the whole hub plan for the WHO and local production of vaccines. And the countries that have been identified or where the spokes will be include Kenya, Tunisia, Nigeria, Senegal and Egypt. And in South Africa, the full operationalization of the mRNA hub has been hampered by intellectual property barriers and challenges in terms of technology transfer and non-exclusive rights to produce, export and distribute COVID-19 vaccines. And there have also been many stories that the other challenge with the local production of vaccines has been the issue of markets for the African-produced vaccines. Existing facilities such as COVAX have not included the African hubs in part of their procurement, and hence, unlike other sources of the COVID-19 vaccines like India, for example, I think they're struggling a bit on the procurement and making the hubs financially or economically viable. Sbu, you had a point to make about the technology transfer and what this partnership is actually going to be able to achieve.
Well, what I like, as in the previous story, is this phenomenon of partnering in order to enhance creativity, innovation, and to ensure that much needed knowledge transfer. This is impressive and mutually beneficial because you have companies, you have regulatory bodies, you have universities, research institutes, and public institutions all collaborating to achieve societal needs. This bodes well for building an entrepreneurial state, which South Africa is presumably striving towards. So this is really the best way to break down intellectual property barriers for the transfer of skills and technology. It is evident that we will have to learn to live with, we have to cope and be prepared to deal with periodic outbreaks of health pandemics. That's what COVID-19 has shown us. So low and middle income countries cannot rely on the benevolence of their global north for public health and for high skills and technology transfers. This again, is what COVID has taught us, because as soon as the pandemic hit, you saw everyone was protecting their own and not caring about next door neighbor. Yeah.
Look, I think for me, what this whole pandemic, and I think I think it is a current transition. I think even in the way people think of these things, and the responsibility that I think lies with developed countries, is that it's brought the notion of no person left behind to the fore and center. I think, unlike other pandemics such as the HIV/AIDS pandemic, or even the Ebola pandemic, and how that was largely contained on the continent, the COVID-19 pandemic was a global issue. And it's quite clear that without a global response and without taking the responsibility to help countries that cannot, be self-reliant, we're not going to make any progress in dealing with the pandemic. And God forbid something else and worse or more fatal and deadly than COVID comes and shakes us before we've made the full transition. The other thing, obviously, is the issue of the clean energy transition, right? And climate change generally.
Yes.
It's another thing that will require kind of global coordination, and it's very encouraging to see some of the partnerships, like the provision of financing from developed states in order to promote the investments, as well as the issues such as the TRIPS waiver, in it being able to equalize the playing field and really make a global response to the global issues that we're faced with. And I think more often these issues are going to crop up, and I think from here on, I do hope that we don't fall into the traps of nationalism, or that we've moved away so far from through the globalization period. But obviously some of that was reversed recently. But truly, it is becoming very clear that without taking a no person left behind approach, a lot of these issues are not going to be resolved.
Yeah, I really like that comparison between the transition and this pandemic, because it is of no use to achieve carbon neutrality, whereas your next door neighbor has not, because these things fly in the air and they affect all of us. Africa is being affected by the industrialization, or the industrialization models of the global north, and we have not developed as yet, but we are being affected. So I really like that comparison.
Yeah.
It's pertinent. Yeah.
No, definitely, man. Precisely. And, Africa is supposedly responsible for about 3.6% of global CO2 emissions. But it's not as though climate change doesn't affect us, with erratic climates, droughts, severe rainfall, and, the like. And, given the fact that we don't have advanced economies or governments which have, deep pockets to respond to some of these things, the actual impact on Africa is much worse than even in the countries that are the top polluters, as a result of limited safety nets, as well as government's much less effective response in some of these things. On that note, this takes us to the upcoming developments segment for the SA update. What we'll be looking forward to over the next month is a number of issues, but I think the first and most important will be the SA national budget, which is scheduled to be tabled on Wednesday, the 23rd of February. And what do you think that the Minister of Finance is going to announce on Wednesday, Smoo?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think he'll just stick to the script. You will announce that the permanent nature of the SRD 350 Rand grant, because it will carry on till next year. And he will have to find the 35 billion Rand without raising VAT. I think he is lucky in that we've had a commodity boom, a mini commodity boom. So he's lucky that we've got some spare cash lying around. Plus, there will also be the usual noise about debt service costs. The Bretton Woods institutions have warned even warned commercial banks in South Africa of their exposure to the South African government bonds, as if these are local banks. And it baffles me that the IMF would say anything of this sort, because these bonds are in the local currency. How can we go bankrupt in our own local currency? Anyway, basically, the budget will spell out in granular detail the IMF's policy proposals as per the 2021 Article 4 annual consultation. In December 2020, I think it was around about the 7th of December, was the last day of their consultation, and the IMF gave South Africa these proposals. And so President Cyril Ramaphosa's SONA was based on these market liberalization precepts. They've set it out, and South Africa is just playing ball. They're doing as they have been told. So that's all that the minister will do, put numbers onto the SONA speech. Nothing will out of the ordinary. I expect nothing out of the ordinary. It will be just as per SONA. Yeah, as per IMF.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And for me, though, I would like the minister to also touch on issues that are pertinent for the economy. For me, the two at the top of my head are how we're going to resolve the energy crisis. The load shedding has really been affecting the country and the economy particularly. And the second issue is around how government is going to work in order to enable further investments in telecommunications and network industries. The pandemic and the future of work being either a hybrid alternative as opposed to working in the office space is definitely going to put a strain of great opportunities also in the telecommunications sector and other network industries particularly. So I think for me, it will be interesting to see what government says on that. And interesting you say that, some of the bonds being SA denominated mean that we are secure in terms of our public debt, because I think we generally assume as South Africans that we still have a debt profile that we had in the early 2000s. And I think the debt profile has changed dramatically over the last, I would say, 10 years. External public debt, and I think this goes to the ownership of who owns the debt, is increasing far more what we used to have. I think the average for a while was around 10% of the public debt. I'm just trying to find the numbers from the latest Article 4, but I can definitely tell you, external public debt is looking at in 2021 is estimated around 40% of GDP. This is quite significant, and we're definitely not in the terrain where we were when external public debt was around 10%. So we would definitely gonna need to tiptoe and spend the next couple of years in terms of the recovery and paying off some of this debt, hoping that we don't face any depreciation in the rand that could lead to public debt spiraling out of control. Zama, what would you like the minister to touch on, or what would you like to hear from the budget speech next Wednesday?
Yeah, interesting comments there, guys. I also think, there wouldn't be anything sort of exciting coming from it. I think it's your usual to be expected. I think for me, I would be keen to hear about the sort of sectors that we're going to be focusing on investing in the economy. I know particularly from, agriculture, construction, manufacturing have been highlighted as sort of, key sectors, as you've mentioned, mining, energy as well. So it would just be interesting to find out what sort of programs and initiatives the government has in place for those sectors, and how they plan on developing those sectors, and how much money they're going to be investing, and how that's going to be used. It's also going to be interesting to see what is said on education as well. You know, it's kind of always the same thing, but it will be interesting to see what's going to be said on education, especially given what has happened with the COVID pandemic, which has completely disrupted the way that learning has occurred, you know, for learners across the board, from university all the way down to preschool. So it will be interesting to find out what sort of measures and what kind of budgetary allocations they'll be giving to education, and of course health. There's a lot going on there, of course, with COVID-19, hospitals. Are we going to be building more hospitals? What's going on with the national health insurance that we've been talking about in South Africa? So it'd be interesting to find out if there's going to be anything around there. And of course, issues such as excise tax as well, you know, that affects certain businesses that were closed down during the pandemic, you know, such as the alcohol industry. It'll be interesting to find out what sort of, you know, sort of things they come back if they, you know, do have any comments on, you know, sort of tax issues. So that's on my side, what I think.
Yeah, interesting point there, Zama, and I like what you mentioned. In terms of taxes, I think I'd be interested to see, since we overshot in terms of our collections based on our projections on the last year, whether government will be giving any tax relief, at least for consumers and households. We always obviously we expect that government will be raising taxes every year, but it'll be interesting to see which way the axe falls. Spoo, any last points from your side?
Yeah. I think your last point that you were making there about what will government give? I mean, there's this whole thing. There was this whole thing about making the ease of. I mean, they appointed someone to make sure that there is less red tape, and then there's all this talk about the ease of doing business. So it will be interesting to find out whether there are any carrots that the government will be dangling, because the talk has all this time around has been about the private sector leading in terms of providing employment. So I would like to know whether there will be any tax rebates maybe, or anything of that sort that will sort of like appease business so that they can invest more in the economy. Because the only thing that the government relies on at the moment will be the enactment of that Regulation 28, so that they can force investors to invest in the real economy. So it will be interesting to see whether there are any carrots that will be dangled. Yeah.
And on that note, I think that pretty much rounds up the upcoming developments in SA, except that we have data outputs that are coming out next month. On the 8th of March, obviously the most important being fourth quarter GDP numbers, followed by January mining and manufacturing, as well as motor sales on the 10th of March, as well as a key event taking place next month on the 24th of March, being the South Africa Investment Conference. And with all this GDP talk and investment conference coming up, I just want to ask what you guys think the fourth quarter numbers are going to be looking like. Up, down, and perhaps just a quick guess of a number that comes to your mind on a quarterly basis. Smooth?
So let me say, this data, the GDP data for the fourth quarter was supposed to have been out on the 21st of February. It was postponed, and Stats SA have said they are doing quality checks and all of that. So that's interesting. But anyway, last year we saw that we had a 1.6% GDP drop in quarter on quarter for the third quarter. That was in December, and because there was a decline in private consumption, so came the festive season, and there was revenue for retailers did not shoot the lights out. So I don't expect a stellar performance for the fourth quarter. It will be very difficult to attain the projected expansion of 5.2%. That's the estimate from the OECD for 2021. So for 2022, the consensus projection among many economists is that GDP will increase by 2.3%. That is for 2022, and I am saying we won't, for the year of 2021, we won't get to that 5.2 that was projected. I mean, even for 2022 at 2.3%, this is very low considering the mountains of challenges facing this country, especially considering that our economy during COVID-19 had been slashed to 2017 levels. So those are my thoughts on the GDP numbers. On mining, production rose by 11.2% in 2021, which is, I mean, we had a mini boom because many economies recovered around the world after the COVID downturn. Manufacturing climbed by 6.4% in 2021, but this was not enough, and it was still way short of pre-pandemic levels. So you have, it's only mining that has been promising. For the rest, it's not been. We're still at pre-pandemic levels. So yeah. Anyway, we've had a great show. We've had positive news, but on the economic front, I don't think it's as promising. Yeah.
No, I think very thorough, Sbu. On my side, I have nothing much to add except to just perhaps, I think I'm in relative agreement with you. I don't know how fourth quarter, well, if it is positive, it's going to be a very small positive number from my view in terms of the GDP fourth quarter. But overall, the year, I don't think we definitely, and ironically, we should be shooting the lights in 2021 given the base effects from 2020, right, when the pandemic hit.
Yes.
And this goes to show just the level of, I think, economic malaise in the economy. And I think it's clear that the economic issues are predating pandemic, and hence the South African recovery is going to be, I think, a lot slower than everywhere else in the world. On that note, that brings an end to the SA update this week, or for this episode. And I'd like to then remind all our listeners, if you're enjoying this episode, hit the like button and share amongst your family and friends. And regardless of whatever platform you're on, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And that takes us to the Africa Regional Update for this episode. Our first story in the Africa Regional Update is the ECOWAS Summit on Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali. So the heads of state and government in the ECOWAS, so Economic Community of West African States, convened an extraordinary summit in Accra. And the main aim of this summit was to discuss political developments in Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali, with a view of ensuring the restoration of constitutional order in these countries. The summit decided to deploy new missions and strengthen existing missions to support the stabilization process in these countries. Zama, what are your thoughts on this?
So I've come across some commentary to the effect that ECOWAS was slow to act in the case of Burkina Faso, which I believe is the most recent coup when looking at these three countries which we're mentioning. So ECOWAS was slow to act in the case of Burkina Faso when it came to implementing sanctions, against the disregard of the constitution and, lawlessness when compared to, sort of their reaction to Mali. So another aspect is that it appears that the people living in those countries are celebrating, these coups, as opposed to, the various communities and countries looking from the outside in. So, I just wanted to get your opinion on what you thought. Do you think the inhabitants of these countries are siding with the government or with the military. I mean, when looking at the series of coups that has occurred in these countries, and understanding that, you know, democracy really at its core is supposed to be the people deciding. Do you think this is a situation where the people are actually deciding to overthrow the government, or do you think that, you know, really, you know, the military is actually causing more havoc than anything?
Very interesting questions, Emma. Look, so maybe it'll help to paint a picture of some of the politics and what's happening in Burkina Faso. And we've covered this a couple of times, particularly last year when we were looking at some developments around terrorist attacks in the country, etc. So just a brief overview is that the issue I think in Burkina Faso with the coup is that there's a lot of insecurity, human insecurity, as a result of terrorist attacks. And Sbu might remember the episode where we covered the brief history of Burkina Faso from the time of the coups that replaced the former beloved leader with Blaise Compaoré. And up until 2014, 2015, when Blaise Compaoré was sort of pushed out of power by another coup. So the country has seen a number of coups, but what was particularly interesting, and you know, this is yet to be verified by I think official sources, is that under the administration led by Blaise Compaoré was a very good political negotiator and was able to secure security for Burkina Faso by making an arrangement with some of the Tuareg groups and some of the militia groups that are operating in the region for them to get safe passage through Burkina Faso in return for not staging attacks within the country. And I think for a long time this kept the country quite safe up until sort of the post-2014, 2015 period, after Blaise Compaoré was pushed out of power. And so there's been a rising number of terrorist attacks and human insecurity in the country. And I think at the time of the most recent coup also, the general populace was tired of the recently elected president who was elected in 2020, who came on the ticket, I think, of providing security and leading the country back towards a path to restoration, but has not been able to curb any of the terrorist attacks. And so the military comes and then stages a coup and promises to take care of the insecurity and the problem of terrorist attacks in the country. Well, it still remains to be seen whether or not the military can actually deliver on this promise. But I think this is the context in which then the population seems to be in support of the coup because of the promises that the military is taking, or the military are making, in order to resolve the problem of human insecurity in the country. So I think regardless though, and this is quite an interesting question, dilemma that you put forward, that should we be praising or criticizing what's happening in Burkina Faso currently, because seemingly it is an expression of some sort of the will of the people, but obviously there are processes that need to be followed, and deposing a elected leader in this way is never going to be easily supported in public, at least. But again, to what are the limits of the expression of the will of the people in the context of violence and human insecurity? I don't know. Spoon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, mine are around ECOWAS. I mean, they've never been this inundated. 2021 and the beginning of 2022 must have set a record for them. I mean, they're trying to put out fires from every direction, these poor guys. What is clear is that unresolved socioeconomic challenges, as we always say on this program, those socioeconomic challenges coupled with fighting of the ever-present insurrections and insurgencies, they've put untold pressure on governments in the West African region. And then there is the failure of the post-colonial dispensation there's an irritation amongst the people with the empty promises of democratization, because we all thought that come democracy, everything will be sorted. I mean, West Africans are crying out for a better arrangement or relations with former colonial masters, that is France. I don't know how ECOWAS will resolve this dilemma, because France, they don't have any power over France. I mean, over local governments, there are suspensions and there are sanctions that have been imposed by ECOWAS on errant member states, but these don't seem to have the desired effect of possibly nullifying the principle. The lack of the effect, it nullifies the principle of zero tolerance for any power that ascends into power through unconstitutional means. There's also the different ways in which ECOWAS treats all these member states. I mean, will the military authorities in Burkina Faso release President Christian Kabore and come up with a transition calendar? Because that's what has been called for. And the guys in Burkina Faso are not moving. In the Republic of Guinea, will the military authorities allow for the return of deposed President Alpha Conde? Because it's been 5 months since he was removed through a coup d'etat, and there's also been no transition calendar that has been put forth. Will Mali authorities draft an acceptable electoral timetable proposal? Question marks. So it looks like the authority of ECOWAS is being challenged. But anyway, having said all of that, I noticed why I read something, I think it was last week, whereby economic sanctions on Mali doing something. I don't know whether Mali will eventually yield and come up with a transition calendar. I don't know, but economic. I actually didn't even know that ECOWAS had that kind of a tool to sort of like hit an errant member state with economic sanctions that bite. So anyway, I think one of these days will give us a bit of a lecture on ECOWAS's economic tools that they can use on these states.
I'd love to go over some of the tools that they use and how they respond. And I think they really also have developed their tools, whilst on the job, because at a time they were using mainly military as a response. And now seemingly have institutionalized a broader set of, sanctions beyond just freezing of membership, etc., which was the initial response, followed by military, in part of their response towards stability in the region. But yeah, you definitely hit the nail on the head there, Sbu, in terms of your analysis of what's going on and really the authority and legitimacy of ECOWAS at stake.
Yes.
On that note, that takes us to the next story in the Africa Regional Update on the 6th Africa EU Summit. So leaders of the African Union Commission as well as the European Union met in the 6th annual conference between the two institutions in Brussels. And in his opening statements, Chairperson of the AU Commission, His Excellency Moussa Faki Mahamat, highlighted a few issues on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the African economy, with domestic savings decreasing by about 20%, remittances decreasing by 25%, and foreign direct investment decreasing by 40%. And in the backdrop of this, countries have been struggling to collect revenues on the back of slow economic activity due to the economic pandemic. And he has called on parties to provide more flexible mechanisms for monitoring and evaluation of projects and programs, and provide more flexible or more efficient results-orientated approach in funding of opportunity of programs and projects between the two institutions. And the summit ended with a commitment to a joint vision for a renewed partnership between the African Union and the EU based on solidarity, security, peace, and mutual sustainable economic development. Sbu, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, we keep bumping against this brick wall, not only as Africa, but the entire developing world. That is the scarcity of financing our developments. And we keep relying on external finance institutions for our own development. So the problem with this is that it leaves one's flank open to exogenous exchange rate blows or volatility of commodity prices, since almost all developing countries rely in the main on primary goods exports. I am pleased that African leaders are frank and honest about these challenges. Basically, as we've said earlier, partnerships with developed financier partners are always skewed in favor of the lender. But then again, even amongst us as the continent, there will be the more developed countries like South Africa who will derive more benefit. And this is automatic because we are more industrialized. And so most hubs will be based in those places where there's more better infrastructure. So it is true that we need to interrogate better and more innovative mechanisms for financing development.
Zama, what are your thoughts on this summit?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what you're saying in terms of, we need to have better relations when it comes to financing for our development here in Africa. And I think that developed countries in some way or the other, knowing the effect that they've had on Africa, due to colonialism, that it is quite a crisis. And I think that we do need to, strengthen our relations with developed countries. And I mean, just from we have so much talent, we have things that we are, that African countries are specializing in, as an example. So we really need to also see how we leverage our specialities in negotiating, particularly with trade, with these countries as well. So, those are my comments there. It is very difficult. I think African countries are struggling, but I think if we can also remember, particularly from that perspective of, negotiating in our favor, what it is that we bring to the table. And if we can remember that, I think it would also help us strengthen our relations moving forward, by remembering what are the specific things that we bring to the table. And if we had to shut down and not export certain goods, what would happen to those developed economies.
On that note, that takes us to the last story in the Africa Regional Update, and there's less violence against South Sudanese civilians. The United Nations mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, has reported a 42% decrease in the number of attacks against civilians in 2021. They recorded 3,414 civilian victims who were subjected to killing, injury, abduction, and conflict-related sexual violence. And this is a decrease from 5,850 in 2020. And currently, men constitute 75% of the victims, while 14% of the cases involved women and 11% involving children. Sbu, what are your thoughts on this one?
The improvement can mean that the process of building a sovereign state and normalization of conditions is starting to bear fruit. I mean, even the operations by UNMISS, those peacekeepers have to be commended for their strategic positioning in hotspots. It shows that visibility of armed forces or policing is indeed preemptive, and it is a proactive strategy. So I think in the final analysis, South Sudan needs to tighten up on awareness programs and build investigative and policing capacity, plus ensure that their judicial system is capacitated and functional. So they need help in that regard. Yeah.
Definitely agree with you there. Zama, you had a point to make about the saddening reality of civilian victims in all this conflict.
Yeah, no, I just thought to myself as I was reading on the story that it's quite interesting and unfortunate that 75% of the people that have suffered are actually men. I know that obviously it doesn't really matter if it's men or women. It's at the end of the day, it's civilians who are suffering. But I just think that how sad it is that people who essentially have nothing to do with what's going on, where wars get instigated at a very high level, but it's actually the people at the very bottom who are suffering. And also the fact that it's men as well, showing that already women in Africa are in a quite precarious position, and are not well taken care of. And so now to already have a lot of men leaving households and finding that women who are suffering great injustices already by virtue of gender, having to now raise families alone. I think it's also just adding to the cycle of poverty in Africa as well.
Definitely agree there, Zama. And which actually reminds me, today is World Day of Social Justice, and quite befitting some of the topics and what we've discussed. On that note, we're now on the upcoming development segment on the Africa Regional Update. And what we expect in the end of February and early March is the 7th PIDA week. And the 7th PIDA week obviously being very crucial for infrastructure development on the continent. PIDA stands for the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. And in March, we expect a huge number of commemorations around human rights, with International Women's Day on the 8th of March, Human Rights Day in South Africa on the 21st, International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination on the same day, and the World Poetry Day on the 21st of March, and World Water Day on the 22nd of March. On that note, that brings us to the numbers game. The number for this week is actually plus 0.25% increase to 4%. I'd like you guys to guess what this number is related to. Zama, I'll give you a go.
Oh no, why are you starting with me? I have a historic just suck at this game. I just historically, I've just been sucking at this game. Okay, 0.25 increase to 4%. I have no idea what it is, but it sounds like some sort of tariff. That's the best that I can give you. Like some sort of tariff on some sort of good. That's the best I've got for you now, Thea.
Not too bad, not too bad. Close, but no cigar. The reason I started with you this week is Sbu has been smashing right through these game challenges, and he's got quite a strong winning streak. So I do want the game to have a bit of a fair chance. So over to you, Sbu. Your turn.
So that's why you tightened up these screws. Man, this number. I mean, I'm trying to think, and it's not inflation, and these numbers are so like 0.25 and 4%. It can only be something like a tariff, like Zama was saying, but I don't know what. So no, you got me this time around. I can't even take a guess.
That's good. That's good. I'm happy to have got you this time. So the number is actually related to the Monetary Policy Committee decision to increase the repo rate by 25 basis points to 4% on the 28th of January.
Oh, wow.
So headline
Oh.
inflation in 2021 came out at 4.5% against the target of 3 to 6%. And the Reserve Bank forecasts headline inflation this year to be revised higher to 4.9% from 4.3% earlier. So there you have it, folks. A 0.25% increase in the repo rate to 4%.
Yeah. Okay. I'm human after all. Okay.
I'm glad to have ended in quite a note. On that note, that brings an end to our episode this month. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.